In this video, I'd like to talk to you about the basics of setting up a networked game object, which uses a network synchronization component, as well as relies on the resources directory inside Unity. Let's take a look at an example. I have my server over here on the right, which I'll start up, and I have a client here on the left. When I connect my client to my server, the first thing it does is instantiate a network game object, which is just this example prefab here. It's a gray cube. We can see that it's instantiated this object over the network based on the console output that we're seeing on the server. We can see that I've connected, server started up, I requested a connection, my connection was approved, and then after I connected, I added a new game object here with this instantiate, and this new game object has a brand new network ID, which is network ID number 1. Over here on the left, let's take a look at the setup for creating a network game object, as well as how we actually instantiate that object once connected to the server. First, to set up a new prefab in order to be instantiated over the network, the prefab must exist inside the resources directory in Unity. This is an implementation detail about the networking library because whenever we send which prefab we're instantiating over the network, we are going to send the string name of that prefab to the server. And then that string name is going to be sent down to all of the other clients connected to our server. So we're going to send the word player over the network to every single client and tell them to instantiate the prefab called player. In order for Unity to be able to instantiate game objects based on their name, they have to be found inside this resources folder, just like this. Now, there are newer and probably better ways to instantiate game objects over a network, but this is the current system that the networking library uses. At some point in the future, we may explore expanding this into some of the newer systems that Unity provides. A game object, when you're setting it up to be instantiated over the network, requires at least one component. That component is the network synchronization component, which provides a bunch of information in order to establish a network connection with this and synchronize the object with this prefab. To actually instantiate a prefab, once we have a prefab here in the resource directory with a network synchronization component, it's relatively simple. Let's look at my example client script here. In my example client script, the first thing it does is I push that button to connect to the server. It checks if I'm logging in, and then I try connecting to the server. The next thing, I will get a onNetStatus connected callback when I've actually finished connecting to the game. At this point, I need to add my client to an area. By default, I just add myself to area 1, and it's super easy. I'm just adding all the clients to area 1 and all my game objects to area 1. For more information about areas, check out the video about area filtering. But for the most part, for most simple projects, you just need to add everything to a single area. Once I've been added to an area, I'll get this callback, onChangeArea. That lets me know that my client is ready. It's established its connection to the server, and it's been added to an area. When I get this, now it's time to actually instantiate my player game object. To do that, it's just a slight tweak from the default Unity instantiate call. Instead of calling instantiate like I would normally, Unity's version of instantiate, instead I call this version, which is part of the client network. As arguments into this instantiate call, I will pass the string name of the prefab I would like to instantiate. So in this case, it's player, and this is just as a string. Be really careful when you're typing this out. If you misspell this, you're going to fail to instantiate the game object as you intended. And then I pass it the position and the rotation that I want this to have. Very similar to if I was instantiating a regular game object. Lastly, I have to add my game object to the same area that my client is in so that I'm actually properly passing the information about the object and giving it to all the other clients. So that's what this next call is here. I'm going to get the network synchronization component of the local game object that's being instantiated on my client, which is returned to me by this instantiate call, just like you would with the regular instantiate function in Unity. I'm going to get the network synchronization component from that object, and then I'm going to call the add to area function, and I'm going to add it to the same area that I added my client to, area ID 1. At this point, it's worth noting that a design decision of this networking library is to not wait for the server to confirm whether or not we're allowed to instantiate objects. That gives us a couple benefits. With most networking libraries, we would instantiate this game object, and then a message would have to go to the server, and then the server would send a message back to us saying that the game object can be instantiated, which is when our client would actually do the instantiation logic. That means that after I call this instantiate call with most networking libraries, I actually don't have a game object in my scene yet. I've sort of just requested to instantiate a game object, and then the server is going to confirm that for me. With this networking library, we instantiate the local game object immediately. And then at the same time, we send a message to the server telling it that we've instantiated it. This gives us the benefit of being able to get the game object right here on this line. So when I say my player is equal to whatever this function is returning, my player is a reference to the game object in the scene. And then I can very quickly get the network sync component and start doing logic with it. These are the fundamentals with how you set up a network game object and instantiate it in your game.